From New York, Mr. Nadler, for an opening.
Thank you.
For his questions.
Last month, I wrote to both of you regarding the apparent outing in the media of a confidential human source involved in the early stages of the Russia investigation. I understand that while I was on the floor just now, one of my Republican colleagues had the gall to quiz you about his identity again today. In my letter, I asked that you, quote, investigate this case for potential violations of the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, as well as other statutes and department guidelines designed to protect the lives of covert operatives and confidential human sources, close quote. Director Wray, last month you testified before the Senate that the day that we can't protect human sources is the day the American people start becoming less safe. Can you further and briefly explain what you mean by that statement?
Congressman Nadler, in investigation after investigation in the counterintelligence front, the counterterrorism front, organized crime front, human trafficking front, and virtually every area of enforcement that the FBI is responsible for, we rely heavily on human sources to come forward and share information with us, often at great peril to themselves and to their families. And that is one of the single most valuable and important tools that we have to keep the American people safe. And it's something that we've relied on for now coming up on almost 110 years of the FBI. And if we start losing that tool because people don't trust us to protect their identities appropriately, the American people will be less safe.
Oh, thank you. First of all, happy 110th birthday. It seems that Chairman Nunes has now asked the FBI for the identities of all, quote, undercover agents and or confidential human sources, close quote, who may have interacted with the Trump campaign. Have you received this request, Director?
I am aware that we received a letter very recently from Chairman Nunes. I haven't looked at it closely yet.
Would it be dangerous for this information to be made public? The identities of all undercover agents and or confidential human sources who may have interacted with the Trump campaign?
Well, as I said, we're going to do everything we can appropriately to protect sources and methods. We are also going to do everything we can to be responsive to legitimate congressional oversight. And my experience has been that when both sides, both the Congress and the executive branch, come into it with the recognition that both are important, Congress needs its questions answered, but sources need to be protected, and we're going to do our best to make sure we do both.
Would be dangerous. The public revelation of those names might be dangerous.
Public revelation of source identity or anything that could lead to source identity would be dangerous.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenstein, in a January 2000 letter to Representative John Linder, the Department outlined the rationale for its longstanding policy to decline to provide congressional committees with access to open law enforcement files. The letter acknowledges that Congress has a clearly legitimate interest in determining how the Department enforces statutes, but also notes that disclosure of documents from our open files could also provide a roadmap of the Department's ongoing investigations that could fall into the hands of the targets of the investigation through inadvertence or a deliberate act on the part of someone having access to them, close quote. Mr. Deputy Attorney General, does the Linder letter still guide the Department's response to congressional requests for information?
Yes, Congressman. I've tried to explain this issue to some of your colleagues. Yesterday, I wrote a lengthy letter to Chairman Grassley with a copy to Chairman Goodlatte that goes into some detail about the background and explains why it is, sir, that this committee would not want us to turn over every document in FBI files. This committee would want us to exercise appropriate responsibility to make sure we're not damaging any case, risking the life or safety of any informant, or causing harm to national security.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Rosenstein, I'm sure you hear complaints that the special counsel's investigation is taking too long. I don't know what Mr. Mueller knows other than what he has put into his charging documents and plea agreements. Everything else we hear about the investigation has either been leaked or made up entirely by President Trump and his lawyers and then repeated by Republicans hoping to undermine the special counsel. I don't know what Mr. Mueller knows, and most of my colleagues are similarly situated. But you know the case better than anyone else. So I have three brief questions. Is the special counsel's investigation taking too long? Has he deliberately slowed his pace? And when his work is done, will the American people look back and view it as a waste of time?
Sir, I can assure you that Director Mueller is moving as expeditiously as possible, consistent with his responsibility to do it right.
He has not deliberately slowed his pace.
Of course not.
And when his work is done, the American people will look back and not view it as a waste of time.
People can draw their own conclusions, sir.
And finally, my last question before the bell rings. Is it atypical or typical for an investigation of this magnitude to take as long as this is done in?
No, sir, I don't think it's atypical at all. I believe that it's being done as expeditiously as possible. That was one of my goals in appointing somebody I knew would be focused on the task, would not be distracted by other matters, and we get it done right and as quickly as possible.
So it's typical, not atypical.
Well, every investigation is unique, but I think for investigations of this type, I believe it's not atypical, and it's certainly not unduly long, given the nature of the investigation.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.